Hands-on learning is a hallmark of 4-H, and most activities in 4-H are designed around the experiential learning cycle. However, hands-on really isn't enough. Research has shown that adding inquiry is an effective strategy to learn both science process and content. Youth model the science process when doing inquiry, and our national goals focus on this approach for learning science.
In these strategies, the learner has more control over how they go about the learning process, and it gives them the opportunity to be more of an independent thinker in solving the particular challenge or problem that's been provided to them. It's an effective way to learn science. We can learn both science content, but through this process, the youth also learn critical thinking skills. It's much more similar to the way science happens in the real world than what we would see in a lecture or in a demonstration. Guided inquiry includes the processes of this independent critical thought. It values the learner's ideas, the learner's questions, allows them to explore those ideas in order to work toward the outcomes that we're interested in them achieving. We're still trying to achieve a goal, a learning outcome, learning content, learning skills, but the way that the learner arrives at those learning objectives may be different. We talk about getting to a destination, that there's more than one way to arrive at a destination when we're traveling. There's also more than one way to arrive at a learning outcome through guided inquiry.
So often I think we shortchange our youth because we give them so many of the answers, and it's more of just a memory lesson for them instead of letting them solve that puzzle. The inquiry aspect caused me to question things I wanted to know that I was curious about. And so it did become my project and my discovery, and it's something that I'll remember much longer. And I think it also motivates youth to search deeper when they leave, so that learning is not something that we always have to spoon feed them, something that they continue throughout their life. It's a lifelong joy of finding that learning experience in everything they do. And it's almost like a wow moment when you have inquiry plus experiential learning. I think that's just the perfect learning scenario.
There are some challenges with guided inquiry. It takes more time. It's what we call messy. It's a little bit loud, a little bit chaotic. But learning occurs in a social environment. Kids learn from one another. Scientists work in groups. They learn from one another. They share ideas.
Young people do well in groups, that they learn more when they're in a group of peers, and that when they have a caring adult or a caring facilitator that's there provoking their learning and making their learning even richer. There's not just the facilitating the inquiry, but then there's the stepping back and saying, what does this mean within this group, and let's reflect about this learning as a group, and let's think about how we're going to apply all of our learning as a group. So it's both very, personal and very collective too at the same time.
There's a misconception that content cannot be learned through inquiry, which is not true. Content can be learned very effectively using inquiry processes. The focus is on the youth learning the concepts, and there may be specific terms that have to be attached to those concepts, which can then be introduced by the facilitator. But the fact that the learners have discovered those concepts on their own means that the learning is much deeper, and then attaching the terms to them has much greater meaning for the learners.
As there are many right paths to learning outcomes, there are also wrong paths, methods that can impede and prevent learning and can turn off your learners. We want to use methods that will turn on our learners.
His assessment of our learning was a notebook, and it really turned me off to science because he was not engaging us in any way. It took me until much later on in life, my involvement with 4-H, to understand that the way we present materials can turn off a learner.
And I realized over the last several years as I was doing scientific exploration with my kids, we often use just canned curriculum. And I always thought that something was really lacking. So I adapted it to include more of an exploration and gave them tons of materials and then stepped out of their way. And for me as a facilitator, initially that was difficult to do. But I allowed them to do that, and we took a 20-minute exercise, an experiential exercise where they could just put it together following my demonstration. And we spent 2 hours building our own sailboats, testing them, floating them, working with one another to make sure that we could adapt and change them to be more successful.
Inquiry and experiential learning are natural ways to learn. And as I was watching Group 2 model experiential learning, I thought, oh, that's us. That's 4-H. That feels comfortable. That's what I think we look like most of the time. And then when I watched everybody interact during the inquiry-based learning, I thought, gosh, we can do more. We can be better. We can have a greater impact on our youth if we find opportunities to practice inquiry. And I think that's a good thing.
As you can see, there's a compelling argument for using inquiry in 4-H for both the learning and the social aspects for our youth. I think they've made a great case of why we should include inquiry in our 4-H program.